Well, let's now take a further look at these issues, and we're being joined now by the co-convener of Election Situation Room, Ms. Esther UZOMA, and Mr. ROTIMI OYEKANMI, who is the Chief Press Secretary to the INEC Chairman. And thank you so much for joining us on the program this afternoon. So I'd like to begin with Mr. OYEKANMI. We just listened to the chairman of INEC, and I want you to perhaps clarify a statement he made. And this is what he said, I'll quote. He says, the commission, that's INEC, will continue to improve on our processes in spite of the extremely challenging environment created by the action and inaction of actors outside our control. Now, that part that says actors outside our control is what I'd like you to perhaps delve into. Who are these actors? I mean, I think it's a big deal, and we'd like you to perhaps clear the air on that phrase.
Thank you very much. You recall that the last governorship elections we conducted in both Kogi and Bayelsa were marred by incidences of violence in certain places. And the commission was established to conduct elections. There is another agency of government that is saddled with the responsibility of providing security. And when you don't have a peaceful environment, you cannot conduct elections. Therefore, when we are saddled with our own primary responsibility, and then some external factors come in and disrupt those activities, then it will be impossible for us to conclude those activities. And that's why we have some of this problem in the electoral system. So what the INEC chairman was simply referring to is that those external bodies are things that are outside our control. And it is now up to all of us as Nigerians, because we all must join hands together to address all these abuses and make sure that these things are put in check. So that's what the INEC chairman was referring to during that speech. I
mean, what came across to me by that statement was as though INEC was overwhelmed by some powerful actors. And I think this was reiterated by what he said, saying that anybody involved in electoral violence will be punished no matter how highly placed. And I think that speaks volumes. So is INEC overwhelmed by some of these powerful actors in court?
Well, it's not a question of being overwhelmed, because we conducted over 195 different types of elections between 2015 and 2019. And many of those elections were successfully conducted. But in some instances, you have a situation where some political actors will kidnap our returning officer, put a gun to his head, and force him to declare them winners. Or in the case of Kogi, where we had stories about some thugs invading polling units, snatching ballot boxes, and all of that sort. That's outside our control. Our ad hoc staff or even our permanent staff are not armed. We are not trained to fight terrorism. We are trained to conduct elections. So this is what we are saying. This is not normal in the society where you turn the polling unit area into a battlefield. So something needs to be done about that.
Right. So let me ask Ms. UZOMA now. You have seen a lot of this, activities on election day, pre-election and after election. I'd like you to help us understand this. Obviously, someone is gaining from a faulty electoral system. And I think that will perhaps help us to identify the problems, who these perpetrators are, so we can proffer the appropriate solutions. So the big question is, who gains from this faulty electoral process? And how can we begin to tackle, the system appropriately?
Thank you very much. The chief gainer of a faulty electoral system stems from the political class. We have a reckless political class whose victory is on the altar of the blood of Nigerian citizens. We have a political class who dress themselves up in uniforms. They bear arms, and they insist on what the results will be. Unfortunately, INEC is not an arms-bearing institution. We saw the charade in Kogi and Bayelsa, okay? And then, regrettably, we have learned, we are giving a veneer of legitimacy to a war that was declared in Kogi and Bayelsa. And so, the biggest gainer is a faulty political class. They are the ones who are getting from a dysfunctional Nigerian electoral system. They are the ones who are getting from a faulty security system. They are the ones who are also getting from the already impoverished citizens of Nigeria. We have an IG of police who said, well, you know what, strangers, put on police uniforms, they are the ones who are shooting. This is beginning to be the narrative. So the gainers are all the officers who will not take responsibility. How many policemen did you deploy? We do not have that answer. Who are the ones shooting sporadically at innocent citizens? They say, well, they are fake policemen. So the gainers are all those people, all those actors who have failed to take responsibility for the offices they occupy and are maintained by taxpayers' money. These are the biggest gainers.
All right.
From this
So,
charade.
thank you. So now let's look at some specifics, because the INEC chairman was talking about, pursuing vigorous electoral reforms. And one big talk, well, two of them actually, but let's start with the smart card readers. And he said that they must be provided for and protected by law. And we understand that sections 49 and 42 of the Electoral Act, as amended, has been, contended over time as to how smart card readers apply. And I understand that the Electoral Act, which is currently at the National Assembly, tries to address that. So I'd like to ask Mr. OYEKANMI to, first of all, clear the air. What is the provision of the law regarding smart card readers, such that the INEC chairman has said it needs to be protected by law? And how are you trying to firm up the lacuna that he talked about in the electoral law, the guidelines of INEC?
Some people tend to mislead Nigerians by saying that, they will refer to the Supreme Court judgment in which the insinuation was made that the court said we cannot replace the voters register with a smart card reader and therefore deflate the significance of the smart card reader. But you see, the law gives INEC the power to regulate and to do things that will ensure the integrity of elections. And what is the use of the smart card reader? Essentially three things. First of all, it establishes that the permanent voter's card presented by the voter was issued by INEC. Secondly, it also verifies that card by establishing that the person purporting to be the owner is actually the owner. Then three, you have to go to authentication, which is the biometrics. And that is, of course, necessary for you to be able to vote. And a little bit of history. The smart card readers were introduced for 2015 general elections. Why was it introduced? It was born out of our experience where some people engaged, among other things, in voting more than once. So it was, again, the issue of the trust in the society where a device had to be introduced to ensure that people don't abuse the process. So that's the work of the smart card reader. And what we are now saying is that it's in our guidelines, it's in our rules for conducting elections, and of course, in that guideline, we have made it very clear that all presiding officers must use. It's even an offense for you not to use a smart card reader.
Okay,
So
Mr. OYEKANMI, we'll come back to some of these issues, especially because we also have, ideas such as the establishment of the Electoral Offences Commission and perhaps any other creative idea that we can use to ensure that we have better elections in the country. Plus, well, thank you, Ibrahim. Let's now rejoin our guests in Abuja. We still have Ms. Esther UZOMA, the co-convener of Election Situation Room. And right next to her is Mr. ROTIMI OYEKANMI, the Chief Press Secretary to the INEC Chairman. Thank you so much for your patience. Now, Ms. UZOMA, on a final note, now, aside the talk about having some form of backing in law for the smart card reader and the establishment of Electoral Offences Commission and Tribunal, what other issues do you think INEC should be pushing for as we prepare for subsequent elections in the country?
Thank you very much. You see, the smart card reader is not finger sensitive. You can validate, you can be authenticated with any of your fingers. And then there must be a way for citizens, voters to, validate the process of authenticating, a PVC. because that decision is left solely to the ad hoc staff who is presiding. And so if he decides to go ahead, you know, and authenticate somebody who the smart card reader has rejected, how are citizens supposed to, you know, how do we validate that process? You see, that is why, for instance, how does overvoting occur? So there must be, as we move forward, I agree totally that the smart card reader, but we need certain improvements on it so that as a voter comes, whether or not that person is qualified to vote, citizens around will also know and follow along with the process. Because if somebody is rejected and that person votes, or somebody votes over and over again, how do we validate it? How do we stop it? It is a decision left solely to that presiding officer. I think, you know, something has to be done so that we know exactly who is voting, who was authenticated, who was rejected, moving forward.
The good thing is that Mr. OYEKANMI is right next to you, and I want to believe he'll pass this up. But I'd like to thank you so much, Ms. Esther UZOMA, the co-convener of Election Situation Room, and Mr. ROTIMI OYEKANMI, the Chief Press Secretary to INEC Chairman. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on the program this afternoon.